Welcome to the Pact Podcast, where we discuss matters of Christian living and Christian discipleship for Christian community. PACT stands for Prayer, Accountability, Confidentiality, and Truth, essentials for doing life together in the local church. I'm your co-host, Tim Harvey, alongside co-host Ian Carrico and Adam Rogers. Now, on to the Pact.
Welcome back to the Pact Podcast. Today, we're talking hobbies. So I know everybody has, well, hopefully everybody has something that you enjoy. And, just kind of thinking about, we've talked about in the past, hunting for the glory of God and how we can redeem that particular hobby for multiple uses. There's other hobbies that we enjoy. And if we're truly people who are attempting to do everything to the glory of God, to enjoy Him through our hobbies, then maybe it'd be helpful just to talk about it. So, guys, let's keep it simple to start with.
Yeah.
What are your hobbies? Ian?
All right. Well, I'm a pretty boring person. I don't have a lot of hobbies. So, but most at Beulah, I know that I enjoy running. I say that. Of course, that's always relative to that word enjoy. Enjoy in terms of that is my hobby. That's my discipline.
Yeah.
That I have in some ways committed myself to. But I also enjoy it. It's just a weird way of, enduring pain, I guess, in the bigger picture of things. But yeah, that's my hobby, and we might get more into this in a little bit. But that's kind of my way out of the world, and my way to be to myself and think through, pray through, or not think or pray through anything. Just be by myself,
Yeah.
So. Like I said, we may talk more about what the end of a hobby looks like, or why we would,
what the purpose is.
What the purpose is of a hobby, but that's mine. I think that's it for me, and we can
just running. That's it.
Yeah, pretty
just
much.
Running.
I can't build anything. I can tear things up. I enjoy MacBooks and stuff like that, but all I do is just mess around with them. So
yeah.
I feel like there needs to be like a Forrest Gump line here.
Yeah.
You want to do the impression?
I cannot do an impression.
Oh, sad.
You go ahead.
I went running. That's Ian Carrico for you.
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
that's
Run,
pretty.
I don't know.
man, run.
Yeah, run, Forrest.
Yeah.
Oh,
Well,
goodness.
I'm kind of at a place in my life now that I'm like when Forrest gets to the end of the deal and he's like he stops.
Yeah.
Looks around. That's what I feel like my body sometimes.
I just got tired.
The aches and
Think I'll go
pains. I'm
home
like,
now.
this could be the end, But
Yeah.
anyways, yeah, that's it. I enjoy it. I do. It's a matter of discipline and things like that. So
Good. What about you, Tim? Hobbies?
My hobbies are, I like to fish, so I don't do a whole lot of it, but I like to fish, hunt some. Mostly things revolve around music, so it's kind of an intertwine there, I guess, between hobby and work for me.
Yeah.
And then working out when I'm physically able to, so that's part of that discipline part, I guess, for me. I do not enjoy running, but
right.
do enjoy working out. I'm sure there's more, but those are the main ones.
Very cool.
And you?
Well, like any other father with two children, I feel like I don't do anything. But the things I enjoy to do the most, I love hiking, backpacking, those sorts of things, camping out. I don't get to do it as much as I would like, but about once a year, I make it a point to get somewhere that's got a longer trail and, try to do, like this last year, I was able to hike Mount LeConte in Gatlinburg, just outside Gatlinburg. Cool. And so, that mountain, there's a long story behind it. Essentially, I've tried, there was two prior attempts to get to the top, and it's not like, we're not talking, this is not Mount Everest. But on my honeymoon, Kara fell about halfway up and I had to hobble down the mountain with a busted knee. The next time we got a late start with some friends and got like maybe a half mile or so from the top and had to turn around so we could make it back before dark. So this last time I was determined. My father-in-law went with me. I said, look, you can make it or you don't. You might have a heart attack on the side of the mountain and I'm really sorry, but I'm making it to the top on this third attempt. So anyway, I did. But that's my big one, is just hiking. I love being outside and it's just one step in front of the other. I used to enjoy running, but clearly I could not run down the hall right now without passing out from exhaustion. So I try my hand at poetry. That's fun. It's an outlet. I'm sure we'll talk about this too. That you were bringing up, Ian. It's just a way out. So writing. Doing those sorts of things. Academics in the past have been kind of a hobby, which is, you just have to be a glutton for punishment for that kind of stuff. So anyway, that's kind of bare minimum hobbies there. Yeah. So why is it then that let's ask this question: why do we need hobbies? I think everybody, even if you're like me and you really don't have the time to get out and do the things that you enjoy, some hobbies require some hobbies require money. There's some expensive hobbies you can get into, but they all require time, and sometimes we don't have the time to get out. But what is it about us that we need to have some sort of recreation? What is recreation for the Christian?
Yeah, I see Tim thinking over there. So I'm gonna let him go ahead and take.
It's funny the things that you don't take the time to really think through. Like things that are a big part of your life. Yeah. Like probably all of us have spent countless hours in some different kinds of hobbies and not really think like, why do I find it important to do this?
Yeah.
And obviously from our biblical perspective, there is a reason. There's a theological, anthropological reason for why we do everything that we do. But to be sitting in a John boat, spider rigging for crappie, I'm usually not sitting there thinking, what is it about me being made in the image of God or the creative order that makes me want to be out here doing this right now? But it's an interesting question. I think it goes back to that word that we've all said already a bunch of times, which is enjoy. It is. I would say that hobbies or recreation are a means for us to worship God if we are thinking about it properly and seeking to glorify God in all that we do, for us to worship God by enjoying His creation.
Yes.
So God has created the world for His glory. Everything's for His glory. The trees, the mountains, the birds, everything is for His glory. And it's a happy exercise of the Christian to think through how those things actually, how is it that the trees glorify God? How is it that the birds and the mountains glorify God? How is it that our enjoyment of the creative order glorifies God? So that would be my sort of real quick answer to that.
Yeah. Well, of course, I'd have to look at a little bit more in-depth study, but I think about the book of Ecclesiastes, probably full. You could probably start to finish find some sort of, I don't know if you want to call it argument, but basis to, think through hobbies and just, really we've been given this life, to enjoy for the glory of God.
Yes.
And we all know that work is, labor, it's strenuous. Most of us at some point get tired of either sitting at a desk all day long, working in a hospital all day long, working in a bank all day long, being at a school all day long. I mean, at some point we need that relief. We need that, opportunity to sit back, look at the world, and just really, like we've talked about, sort of escape ourselves in some ways and enjoy.
So it's not a relief, escape. Really, those words would be really close to the word rest.
Right.
So hobbies, recreation is really close to the rest, a way of resting.
A way of resting, yeah. So many. I've thought about this a lot actually, because I've really had to think about enjoying a hobby a lot. This is just me personally, because of how poor I am at resting. It comes to a Saturday or, sometimes on a Monday, like is supposed to be the day off, right? Or for me it is anyway. And but how often, whenever it comes to finally getting an opportunity to enjoy a day off and to do the hobby I like, I'm a person who feels guilt pretty profoundly. I'm sure there's people listening that feel the same. So I finally get to go hiking. I finally get to go kayak at the lake or something, and I'm halfway there, and I'm thinking, yeah, but I should be doing yada yada.
Yeah,
and probably that's a lot of people fall.
Yeah, and it's a terribly unhealthy way of thinking, and we all know that it's terribly unhealthy, and yet we still do it. Right?
What's that rooted in? I mean,
sin.
Okay.
It's well for me. I'll answer for me personally. It's rooted in perfectionism. A lot of it is because for me, like there's things that need to get done, and I feel the need to do it perfectly, which is again a unrealistic expectation. The expectation put on us is faithfulness, not perfectionism.
Yeah.
And so so it comes to that day off, and I think about the things that didn't get done well and the things that have not yet been done, and I just can't rest.
Yeah.
I can't just relax. I feel like I should be doing whatever, and I should be doing it better and more. And that's not just with work. It comes to, again, I'm just speaking on behalf of myself. Comes to that Saturday, I'm going to go, deer season going on right now. I'm going to go hunting, or I'm going to go kayaking at the lake, and I'm halfway there, and I think, well, but Kara's got the kids. She's always got the kids. So why am I going to go? And so you can go one of two directions here. You could be like me and just have this guilt complex all the time, or you could be on the opposite side of the spectrum and never make any consideration whatsoever. And I think both are a burden.
Right. Yeah.
But anyway, I've had to think about this quite a bit about recreation and rest is the right category, because we are designed to rest. And I think of so many different people and realms of life that I've read, like James P. Boyce, when he wrote, he was he was one of the founders of the Southern Baptist Theological Seminary, which was in Greenville, South Carolina, before it moved to Louisville. And he had given a commencement address to his students, telling them at the end of the semester to go home and find rest in basically new occupation. And I can't remember the exact quote, but essentially he was saying you don't rest by leaving, in this case, the seminary and going home and doing nothing. In fact, he's making the point for all of us that you don't find rest in nothingness.
So maybe we need to ask the question, like, what are we talking about when we talk about rest? Because I think about Ian, you're saying, and I don't know if you would think of running, if you would term it as being restful.
Right.
Maybe you could help us with that. But if we're saying that recreation, hobbies, and you're saying yours is running, and I would not look at running as restful. A lot of people wouldn't. But would you say that it's restful to you? And if so, like, what does that mean?
Yeah.
What are we talking about?
Well, and that's a very good point, because no, it's not restful. It takes physically, it takes a lot of work.
Yeah.
And so, for example, and I didn't know if we was going to cross into this. I don't want to steal the thunder and let you guys talk and say what you need to. But like if you're training for a marathon, for example, 26.2 miles, that's a pretty structured, disciplined, rigorous, depleting, task at hand, to do that and complete that. I mean, you're talking about 20-mile running, runs within a week's time. That's one run, not including all the rest of the week. Just had a conversation with a brother about a triathlon, an Ironman, and how that was just that consumed his time. I think that was the idea behind the conversation, and how we got to be careful, I think, when we talk to our spouse, for example, because they can be overwhelmed with the commitment and time that's required for that.
Sure.
So it's an interesting conversation. I don't know that I have the answer to that, other than to say, no, it's not rest physically, but yes, it is.
Is there a kind of mental rest that comes with it?
Yeah,
or something,
I think, and that's why I probably said earlier, it's an out. It's because running, like you said, is not rest.
Yeah.
Like it would be. Let me grab a book, turn on the lamp, grab a cup of coffee.
Yeah.
Inhale and exhale. I mean, you're doing the right opposite with whether it's hiking, even. If you were going to do that 5 days a week, committing early mornings or late afternoons to do that, over time your body, it gets wrecked. Right now I've got aches and pains. Of course I've cried to these brothers, about how bad my knees hurt and stuff like that. And so it does take another form of the idea of rest. Though I think, to just quit talking, I guess, I think it is rest in the sense of like a mental rest.
Mental rest. But that's interesting, because you said that there's a time that you would see educational kinds of stuff as recreation.
In a sense, yes.
But that would not be mental rest at all. And it would be maybe physical rest, but not mental rest. So there's even kind of another sort of of rest, apparently.
So I think that our rest is all locked up in that seventh day rest of God, that true Sabbath. Mm-hmm. Because when God rested from his activity of creating, God did not become inactive.
Right.
Instead, what we see is God looking actively on his creation in satisfaction of the completion of what he had done in those 6 days of creation. When we think theologically through the storyline of Scripture, you have that Sabbath day instituted in the Ten Commandments, but ultimately the Sabbath itself finds its fulfillment in Jesus, according to the book of Hebrews, who is our Sabbath, and one day there is a Sabbath rest to be experienced by believers. And yet what we see, if Jesus is our fulfillment of the Sabbath, Jesus is not inactive now. His work has been satisfied, and now he's still interceding for his people and those sorts of things. But it is a joyful satisfaction that leads to activity, that is rejuvenating to the heart. And so it's a rest that's not inactive, but it's a rest that brings life. And I think that we find that satisfaction and we have that rejuvenation of spirit and life, essentially, because of these activities, which are restful, even if they are running, even if they are hiking up a mountain, even if they are, sitting on a boat during maybe a few mile-an-hour winds and you're tossing back and forth. I mean, these are things that might physically have some sort of tax on us.
Thanks for throwing a bone there, because I just realized that my hobby is the only thing that's really just restful all around. Well, sitting in a boat is not mentally or physically taxing.
No, well, it can be mentally. I mean, sometimes you're with your thoughts on the boat.
You pump some iron, brother. So that's
that's true.
That's not easy.
Clearly, I work out constantly. You can just tell. It's not. But here's what's amazing. Okay, so I'll just use my hobby or two of the hobbies I mentioned. I love hiking. And I really appreciate poetry. I'm growing in that appreciation for it. And it's amazing to me how many secular people, totally not remotely Christians, have a better grasp on this than we do. And so I think of this guy. His name's Alfred Wainwright. He's passed on several years ago now. He lived in England, and he wrote a lot about walking in the mountains. And there in England, there are mountains. Fells they call them instead of mountains, but he asked the question, why does a man climb mountains? And he follows up, look, you're exerting sweat, you're exerting time and energy when you could just be at the ocean sitting in a chair, and he goes on in this quote. He says that he finds more and more people turning to the hills to go walking, and there's a variety of reasons. It could be they're just enjoying the wild things in wild places. They're looking for solace for the soul. They're looking for exercise for the body. There all these different reasons. So you re-ask the question, why does a man hike? Why must a man climb mountains? And then he says it's a question every man must answer for himself. And he's getting at something pretty profound. Each of us is going towards a hobby in order to find rest, but rest for what? That's the question that every man has to answer for themselves. And as I think for us as Christians, we need to grapple with this question because we're going to a hobby because of something in us that needs rest. And we find that rest in that hobby. So whether it be rest for the soul, rest for the mind, rest for the body, there's different kinds of rest that we can experience. But I think centrally for that is whatever hobby we find ourselves gravitating to and spending our time in. As Christians, we want to consider how is God using this to bring satisfaction and rejuvenation in my life, because hobbies are not evil, or they don't have to be. They can be. They're I guess amoral. Now we can abuse our hobbies. We can ignore our family. We can ignore our gathering times with the local congregation. We can sink all of our money and energy into that. We can ignore a lot of things in life, and in that sense, that hobby would be wrong and disordered. But for us who find our hobbies to be rejuvenating, it's because it's in its proper place and it's got that proper. It's medicine, in other words, for the soul. And I think it all comes back to thinking about how God has instituted rest in creation order that reflects his Sabbath rest that he takes. It's not inactivity, but it's activity that is in itself bringing satisfaction and peace, I think, in the life.
I think that's a good question of, you brought up that hobbies themselves are amoral, but they can be immoral if taken to extremes. Sure. So we put too much time, too much money, or whatever, so that we're neglecting other responsibilities. But I think your point to saying that Ecclesiastes helps us have perspective here is really helpful, because on the one side, you can be a person, like Adam mentioned, he struggles with ever enjoying that hobby because of feeling guilty.
Yeah.
Or you can be on the other end where I'm just going to have enjoyment all the time, and I'm not going to care about any responsibilities. But the perspective of Ecclesiastes, I think, grounds us into recognizing that, for one, don't take yourself too seriously.
Yes. Right.
You're a vapor. You're a mist.
Yep.
In recognizing that I'm a vapor allows me to enjoy sitting on the boat, because, I'm not that big of a deal. So, so the time that I'm out here is not gonna, mess up the whole world because I'm sitting on a boat for a few hours. But on the other hand, remembering that God's created us for a purpose, and it's not just to squander our time with, hobbies constantly. I think that we need that perspective.
Yeah. I'm glad you brought up Ecclesiastes. This is one of the more important books in my own struggle with all this, and even sometime last year, having the opportunity on Wednesday nights to preach through the book of Ecclesiastes was really good for my own soul. And it's exactly what you just said, which I think we can summarize in that Westminster Catechism question: what is the chief end, the chief purpose of man? It's to glorify God and to enjoy Him forever. Well, I think a lot of people think of a question like that, we're supposed to glorify God and enjoy Him. And they think that's just like only within the confines of religious duties,
right?
Like Sunday morning worship gatherings, or intentional outreach ministries on a Saturday morning, those sorts of things. But when you look at the book of Ecclesiastes, food and drink are meant to be a means of satisfaction and joy in God, not merely what takes place on a Sunday morning or within the confines of a Christian ministry. Yeah. And so blending those things together, we realize that we glorify God by enjoying Him through the means in which He's created for us to enjoy. And that, I think, we can do without guilt, speaking to my own issues, but also without abuse, without going to the point, which Ecclesiastes does, to say that pleasures in this world are all there is. We call this hedonism, where people think that earthly pleasures are the highest good you can pursue. So you just party on, do all your stuff, whatever you want, enjoy every worldly pleasure without any regret. What they don't realize is how much regret that does bring. And so
that's destructive for two reasons. One, it doesn't glorify God. You're not fulfilling your purpose, but also it leads most people anyway can't stay there forever. No. And they realize that it itself is a vanity, chasing after the wind, and then they end up in despair and nihilism. I was going to say, it's the irony. You go from pleasure is all there is, and when it fails you, finally, to all is meaningless.
Nothing. All is meaningless, which is why we need the book of Ecclesiastes. It's not a, I know a lot of people read the book of Ecclesiastes, especially after listening to this. If you've never read it, you go read it. You might be tempted to think this is the most depressing and pessimistic book I've ever picked up in my life. Well, in some ways it could be until the book ends, and you see the high note of everything has. Well, and even throughout,
if you're coming from a Christian perspective, and when we were both teaching through this at the same time, one of the things that I kept bringing to the adults is, if we keep Ecclesiastes in mind with what Jesus taught about our don't lay up for yourselves treasures on earth. Temporary treasures, but lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven.
That's right.
That perspective of Jesus teaching about treasures, with the filter of that, as we're looking at Ecclesiastes, helps us to understand that Christians of all people are the ones who can see this book not as depressing, but as a book to give rejuvenation and perspective and hope.
That's good. So let's switch gears just a second. It's all in line with what we've said, but just to kind of give maybe some people are listening and thinking, well, that's, I'm theologically starting to come to understand what a hobby is and why I need rest and that kind of thing. So how is it that a person redeems their hobby? And by this, I mean, so they've got the thing they're interested in. maybe they've not given it much concrete thought about how that brings, how they are to live and or pursue that that hobby and bring God glory. How do they redeem their hobby in order to more intentionally bring glory to God?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think, use it as a tool for evangelizing.
Okay.
Within a community of every hobby is going to have believers like everything and unbelievers. And I think one, at least a good way to do that would be to think of the Great Commission within the hobby. So whether it's sewing, hunting, running, fishing, hunting, whatever it may be, you're going to have the opportunity to develop relationships with other people. And I would think, prayerfully, and I think, looking with your eyes wide open at those opportunities to use that as a platform to reach people for Christ. Could be another dynamic of discipleship. If you've got a group of believers within a church, within a community that enjoy a particular hobby, to be able to use that as some sort of, I think, point of impact, for the Christian. Again, probably especially in our hobbies we're talking about, you're probably not going to be carrying the big family Bible around, and stuff like that and opening it up. But it's still just the idea of, we live in a broken world and there's pain and trouble, and to have that connection and to be able to lean on one another, within the context of the hobby is a wonderful way to pray and to bear one another's burdens, especially talking about pact, that idea. So I think evangelism and discipleship, that's my, just off the top of my head, way that you could really redeem a hobby for the glory of God, use it for His kingdom and purpose. I'm sure there's others, but that's good.
Yeah, that's good. The only thing I'd add is just in our enjoyment, remembering that God is the giver of all good things.
All good things,
So, while I'm fishing or while I'm hiking or while I'm not going to be running, but while you're running.
I remember one day I said, I'll never do this, and the next thing you know, here I am. But I guess that's with anything. Yeah.
Well, maybe through this conversation, then we can say that we've used phrases like it's an outlet for me, etc. Maybe then it's the case that really when we consider hobbies as a Christian, we're not meant to check out, but we're to be connected somehow, either connected to the Lord Himself or glorify God through Christian camaraderie, in the common pursuits, whether it be two guys sitting on a boat or two guys walking up a hill. I've found that the conversation that takes place in that sort of camaraderie, where you've got a mutual goal and you're both exercising a mutual effort towards that end, produces that brotherhood, within you, and there's the conversations that flow out of that are, I think mostly God glorifying, because normally they're especially for the Christian, it ought to be conversations about life in general, and us sharing our burdens, even if we're not quoting scripture back at each other, is a way in which we are edifying one another. And so spending that time with one another I think is great. I know that for me personally, that peace and satisfaction, that rest that I've experienced on the trail has been wonderful. I know there's another guy.
And that goes, on the trail, and you're perfect, exactly right, that camaraderie or evangelism, discipleship. But there are times that it is okay to be on the trail by yourself.
Yeah.
And you can still do that to the glory of God.
Absolutely.
And it might be that connection is more personal with God during that time. I was thinking about Jonathan Edwards would often take walks out in the wilderness for that purpose, to remind himself of the goodness of God's creation. It was his hobby as Puritan pastor, but those times were important to him for his relationship to the Lord. And I don't know, this might not be a great packed pick, but he also wrote The End for Which The End for Which God Created the World. Which is a very, very, very difficult read, but it's great. I mean, it's great for those who want to try to,
a God-entranced view of all things, I think, is what you were going to mention.
God-entranced view of all things is
John Piper's unpacking for
Right.
you of that dissertation, which
Yeah.
is very helpful. It also
Yeah.
has that. The
And
full
we've
text
talked
in the
about
back.
Tim Keller in here some, I think, or maybe
We've
not in
mentioned
this
the name.
particular, but Tim Keller's a good author and pastor. But it just reminded me, I think it was last week, he shared that this is one of the most important books he's ever read was
Yeah.
Jonathan Edwards' The End for Which God Created the World. So.
And it's tough, people, but you need a challenge that will
Yeah.
bring you
But he's
rest
dealing
for
with
the soul.
somewhat dealing with things like
Yeah,
this. Like,
he
how
is.
is it that every part of our existence, including things like hobbies,
Yeah.
are for God's glory,
Right.
ultimately?
Yeah. Yeah. So I want to reiterate what you just said. Don't discount hobbies that cause you to be alone, because sometimes that is the most profound time to be with God. And I'm reminded
Sure.
of another poet. He's actually a Kentuckian. His name's Wendell Berry. I'm not sure if he's a Christian or not. I know he's written a lot of short novels and stuff, but he has a poem that essentially that he talks about. He writes a lot about nature and stuff. So whenever he's tossing and turning in the bed at night and just grieving over what might come, he talks about going and laying down at the pond where the duck flies and lands and is just there. And the line that sticks out that's so profound, he says, "I come into the peace of wild things who do not tax themselves with forethought of grief." And I think the point that he's getting at is these animals just live and enjoy God's creation as God's creatures. Now, where does he get such an idea? Jesus talks about us not worrying about our life. We're more valuable than the sparrow. We're clothed better than the lilies of the field. And I think for me, it's that's a secular take on it. But for me, going out into nature and communing with God in that way, I come into the peace of God, not just in the peace of creation. Creation teaches me that they're not taxed with forethought of grief, what's going to happen to them and how they're going to pay for this and how they're going to take care of that and what's going to become of their families, etc. They are living in peace, and they're just mere creatures. We are creatures created in the image of God to enjoy His peace, and so whatever your hobby is, then you certainly can enjoy God in those sorts of things. So, any other parting
Nope.
thoughts there, guys?
Good job,
Great
brother.
conversation. Hopefully, we'll all get to go enjoy our hobbies rather soon then. And until next time, we will see you on the Pact.
Thanks for listening to the Pact Podcast. Weekly, we get together to think out loud, discussing ethics, apologetics, theology, and how to apply God's Word to our everyday lives. Subscribe to our podcast on iTunes, Google Play, or Spotify. For more information about our podcast, to connect with us or our church families, visit thepact.podbean.com. We pray you've been encouraged today and that you'll take the pact with a group of close believers pursuing prayer, accountability, confidentiality, and truth.